welcome to this episode of Fuel Talk from Cox Automotive Europe. Fuel Talk is a straight talking podcast series that, on a bi-weekly basis, shares valuable context around Cox Automotive Europe's latest news, insight and experience. I'm James Davis, and for this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by two of the UK's leading market makers and valuers of products with decades of experience to talk about their observations on the auction market in the UK. So welcome back, Andy Conde, who is Manheim Auction Services General Manager of Group Auctioneers, and delighted to be joined by Stuart Peak, who is the National LCV Manager for Manheim Auction Services. So welcome, gents.
Thank you.
Afternoon, James.
And I appreciate your valuable time. We've pulled you off those digital rostrums, but we're really keen, and we had some great feedback last time, Andy, that you joined Fuel Talk in terms of your observations on the market. So clearly with your car hat on and Stuart's LCV hat on, we'll get a great balance in terms of what's happening. So here we are, a month into second quarter in 2021. Can't believe where the time's gone. We've obviously now probably a month or so since dealerships' forecourts have reopened. So let's just kick off your views and observations on the market so far this year. So Andy, coming to you first, Q1.
Well, yeah, Q1, we started back in January. Don't know about you both, but January seems an awful long time ago. We started off, obviously, online sales, and nothing's really changed. We're through this, was it third lockdown now? We had a brief lockdown in November, but third lockdown. But unlike the very first lockdown, business was almost as usual. We were selling a lot of cars online. People got used to what they were doing. We were very strict in what we did regarding collections, deliveries, and the job was very, very strong. And I think everybody was looking towards the end of the lockdown period as to what was going to happen. And I was very much, I think people thought we were going to go back to where we were in sort of 12 months ago when we opened up and prices went through the roof. And after about 6 weeks, prices dropped off a little bit of a cliff. And I was very much, in the camp that we didn't really want to see that again. We knew we were going to see an increase in prices because we knew the pent-up demand was going to be there. We knew that consumers wanted to buy vehicles. And it was far healthier. I believe it's far healthier what we see now. Yes, we have seen a spike in prices, without doubt. But we've seen a steadying in prices. We haven't seen a massive spike. And I think you have to look at the biggest concern I've got, and I think the biggest concern a lot of my colleagues in the industry is that where are all the cars going to come from in the future? And I think that is what's going to keep, the market flowing. And I think it's something maybe, we could speak a little bit later on about. But from my point of view, the job has been extremely strong with cars. There's been a lot of demand out there. Not over excessive demand. It's those grade ones and grade twos that have really caught the attention of everybody and have really started to make the money. And of course, it's good that I think quite rightly as well. I think our friends at CAP, they were rather conservative at the start, and I was having a bit of a go and saying I think you should increase your price a little bit more. But I think they've played it exactly right. When you look at what they did, they didn't go mad. People have said, we could have increased a little bit more, but they've been very steady all the way through. And I think that's helped the job, and they responded when they had to respond. So for me, it's been very, very strong, very good. And I quite enjoyable, not as enjoyable as you would hope, but it's certainly a change. But, and to see so many of the old faces coming up online and having chat. So it's been really good as far as the car's concerned.
That's great. And is that something you've seen? Has it been very much steady performance through the first quarter, or has it ramped up from month to month? Or
no, it was funny. It started off. It certainly ramped up since the showrooms were allowed to open, but it hasn't ramped up to a mad peak that you thought it was going to be. It certainly ramped up. There's certainly been a demand. I think some of I spoke to some of my friends in the big car supermarkets, and the first day they opened, they were hitting record figures. There was people queuing out the door, and the first week, quite a lot of them sold more than they've ever sold before. I know it's slowed down a little bit, but also I think they've realised that they're having to give more for cars, because those real nice quality cars, the cars that I always talk about, buy, clean, sell, are really the ones that there's not that many about. So, to buy it, clean it, sell it, you've got to give a premium price to sell it for a premium price. And I think that's what you have to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess there'll be some nuances coming to you, Stuart, in the LCV world. But how have you found Q1?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar, very similar to the car job, really, James. But probably just that little bit ahead, maybe in some circumstances. I mean, I think the market has started off incredibly strong throughout Q1. And in fact, looking back at the data for April, it's accelerated further again. We look at the average selling price, for example. If we go back to January, last month in April, our average selling price was £1,141 higher than January. And we've seen 3 consecutive months of an average selling price increase as well. And when you start to break down the dynamics and look at the stock profile, there's very, very little in it with regards to average age and mileage as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's kicked on, very, very well. I think, one thing to Andy's point that he made, it's not been plain sailing. I think we've had to work very, very hard to generate those results. Perhaps, and another point that Andy made there around, he's encouraged CAP to put the prices up. I mean, we sit on a call sort of weekly with Steve Botfield and the team at CAP, and we've not had to encourage them to do that. The data has been there and it's been very, very clear to see. I think as we've gone into May again, again there's been another book increase, and all of the trade that I'm speaking to, they're just sort of saying the same thing. When is it going to stop? When is it going to slow down? One of the first conversation I had with a local trader this morning said, "Oh, it went a bit quiet last week," and I said, "Well, it's a bank holiday. What would you expect? So I think from my perspective, it could not have started any better. We are at absolutely record-breaking levels in the LCV world. One interesting thing: first-time conversions did dip very slightly in April. Just proving that we are really having to push hard and drive the market, which we're doing day in, day out. So, but it's in great shape, genuinely in really good shape.
No, that's great to hear. And I think going back to you, Andy, in terms of, it's interesting you mentioned, Stuart, about bank holidays and seasonality, which is a usual phrase that we use, don't we, at certain times of the year. It almost feels from what you've said then that we haven't suffered as much seasonality this year. Would that be fair to say? It's literally just we've come out of the retail showrooms reopening. I mean, Andy, I guess specifically that question is more, clearly our dealers, our buyers have been trading through click and collect in a COVID compliant manner as they can do with the advice at the time. Do you see that it was directly the opening of the showrooms then that's led to this step up of demand in April that Stuart's talked about, with the vans? Do you think that's true of cars?
No, I think the demand is there in an industry as well. We held 2 bank holiday sales yesterday, one in Bristol, in fact 3, Bristol, Leeds last night, and Washington, and we probably averaged across the 3 between 82 and 85% conversion. Now, we would never do that on a bank holiday. We would never. And when I look at people that are really hungry for cars, and interesting, I was on a review with some customers last week, and they were saying, well, would somebody really who are based in Northampton want to buy a car that was maybe in a Northampton sale, but the car was located in Colchester? I said, yes, they would. I'm off to Manchester later on for their evening sale. We'll have people online from Bristol, Exeter, London. Travel distance is irrelevant. It's about getting in the right car for the right money. That is what it's all about, and it really is irrelevant. And we've seen since the start of this the pandemic, everybody having to change the business module of what everybody does has just had to change. And it's quite interesting what Stuart just said about commercial vehicles. I, like you, James, been in the job a long time, and I always felt that the commercial markets were a reflection of the economic situation of the country. And yet the LCV market has been as strong from day one of the pandemic all the way through when the country was virtually in lockdown. So, that theory has gone right out of the window. But I think that, I think as far as, where cars are concerned, and I think we have to remember, there's a big pent-up demand. One of the biggest increase in values going into a month-on-month has been executive cars, flashy convertibles that people want to spend money on, and people really do want to invest, but they want to treat themselves. And I think, one thing that I've realized through these, life's too short, isn't it? Life is too short not to enjoy yourselves, and the great work that you do, James, with your various charities, and you give so much back. But life, and as well as I do, life is too short. And if you see something, I think people are stretching themselves and they want to, they want to buy it and they want to enjoy life and they don't want to go back to where we were. And I think an awful lot is around that.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, Andy. And I think, talking about stock profile specifically then, so you talked about executive cars, which I think I heard the phrase the other day, revenge spending, which is that whole, we've been locked up for so long that we've decided to give ourselves a present, if you like, as we come out of the pandemic. But are there any specific, there was talk, for example, in the press about more people maybe buying a smaller, better value car rather than jump on public transport because there's a nervousness. Coming to both of you, but Andy, you first. Have you noticed any particular segments or age bandings of vehicles cars that have been more popular in the pandemic, or is it?
No, I think that the lower end, the cheaper market, is showing signs of just slowing down a little bit. And I think that's because people are cautious. They want to buy something that they can ready to drive. But I think one thing that we must all realize is that 10 years ago, we had a plethora of leasing companies that we all dealt with. We could all name them, we'd run out of all the leasing companies. You can probably name them now, really good ones on one hand. And so the market has become smaller. The way that we've adapted and evolved means that people won't need company cars because they'd rather have what's the point in having a company car when you're based at home? You get taxed to the hilt. It costs you anyway. So people will look at it and say, well, I may as well have the money, the benefit in my pay packet at the end of a month than have a company car. So those leasing companies and those fleet companies that have company vehicles to dispose of, there won't be any. Or there'll be very few company cars. So what will happen? Where will the dealerships, where will the car supermarkets buy the cars from? I don't know. But what you also have to remember is that while people don't have company cars, they will need a car, so they'll have to go and buy one. So where they're going to buy those cars from, and therefore they're going to be at a premium. And that is where, the manufacturers, we all know the difficulties in getting new vehicles. Stewie, you'll know about difficulty in getting new vans, new cars, exactly the same. How can you go and buy a new car? So it's going to be really interesting over the next 2 to 3 years of where these cars are going to come from. And what I would say is, maybe people will be forced to hang on to the car a little bit more, or may be forced to buy an older car for a little bit less money, because they could well get priced out of that market of ready-to-retail stock, because that ready-to-retail stock isn't going to be there. You see these big car supermarkets that have got 1,500, 2,000 vehicles on site. Where they're going to get them from, I don't know. And I think we're in for a very, very interesting period as we look to the future about where our vehicles are going to come from. And you know what? We may go right round in a circle and people may jump back again on public transport. It's interesting. I think public transport is going to be all about confidence as well. I think people have to feel confident. I don't know about you two. I've not been on a train for goodness knows how long. I've not been on an aeroplane. I can't wait to get on one. But interestingly, who wants to get on the first aeroplane that's going to fly? Has it been serviced? Have they done this? Have they done that to it? I think it's going to be a stage of what we all think. And I think we're all thinking what's going to happen in the future. So, and we're no different.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think it's interesting. There's so many different dynamics at play that we've seen some of them at play in isolation. For example, in a recession, which I know we've all experienced at least one in our careers, maybe more. But I think it's interesting. You talk about vans, and Stewie, I know there's a famous phrase that I heard many years ago that if you bought it, a commercial vehicle brought it. So I think to Andy's point, I think that probably explains why commercial vehicles have been so popular in the pandemic, because we've all been buying, but obviously, constricted to home. But asking you the same question, have you seen any specific segments of CV that have fared better or worse? I think it's specifically maybe minibuses.
Yeah, I think, that anything chassis derived, James, certainly, you know, from a tipper, drop side loot and anything like that has been in really short supply, and has made, you know, incredible money at auction, you know, week in, week out, consistently for a long time now. You know, anything chassis drive, very much, you know, flavour of the month, you could say, flavour of the day, flavour of the week. Panel van, you know, there's been a lot of panel van sector, you know, from the panel van sector around this year in particular. We've certainly seen a, you know, a big spike, you know, right from January within that sort of larger panel van sector. But again, you know, there's been a huge demand for it, which has been great, and it's been continuing to hold up really well. The minibus sector is interesting. I was just having a bit of a look at some stats on minibus this morning. Now, that suffered really considerably last year. In fact, it was the only one sector that took a huge knock once we came out of the first lockdown. But we've seen some really strong recovery this year within that sector. You know, in particular, you know, I mean, if you look at our performance in April, you know, it's you know, it's continued, well, 106.22% of cap average for a minibus in April. You know, last year we were 85, 90% of book, sometimes 70%, you know, and obviously cap had adjusted the prices accordingly to going by what the demand was for those particular vehicles at the time. But they have started to recover, which is really encouraging. So, yeah, I mean, I think other than that, you know, throughout the whole of the sectors, James, you know, it's only really been the minibus sector that has taken that took that initial hit. And that's for obvious reasons, you know, because of the, you know, the usability of a vehicle during a pandemic. But everything else, absolutely, you know, particularly the, you know, tippers, drop sides, they've been really, you know, absolutely flavour of the month. And that is because there's been such a shortage of them. You know, we've not seen any huge batches of them come back. You know, so whenever you do get one, and that will be anything, it doesn't matter how old it is. It could be a 15-year-old transit tipper. It will still make incredible money. So yeah, it's been very healthy. So.
So, and interesting, you mentioned those kind of variances, because I know you both work, as you both said, you both work closely with CAP and other price guides, sharing your insight to the marketplace, which is really important. Have you found any need for vendors to be more pragmatic? Have you found anything in terms of vendors, any advice you've having to been given them to help them get vehicles on sale quickly? I mean, coming to you, Andy, first, has there been anything specifically that stood out, or?
Yeah, I think it's a balancing act. I think from an auctioneer's point of view, you have to try and manage vendors' expectations. You know, when the job's tough, you've got to prepare them that the job's going to be tough. But when it's good, you've almost got to hold them back a little bit on a leash. Just say, well, just steady on. And I think we have seen signs that some vendors get a little bit over enthusiastic. You know, and my advice to all of them is trust us. You know, I've said to some of my auctioneers, don't be afraid to hold a bid provisional, even if a vendor is telling you that he wants more money, because we know exactly what's going to happen. So, you know, I think we should be prepared to negotiate on bids. I think vendors, you're far better to take a bid than to run somebody out and not be able to sell the vehicle. You know, if you've got a reserve on something, be prepared to negotiate, take a little bit less. That's what I'm saying to people. We can work, we can get that price up, or at the end of the day, you look at the basket of vehicles that you're selling and you think, I should have sold that. There's nothing worse than a vendor at the end of sales telling you, and it does happen, I should have done that, I should have sold that, I should have listened to you. And you know what, often we're as bad, auctioneers as bad, we get overexcited, but I think from my point of view, you know, vendor-wise, they're enjoying it as much as we are. They're sitting there and you know, and they can't believe what's happening. But I think we have to remember that if a buyer is not making a profit, they're not going to come back and buy another vehicle. And sometimes we tend to forget about making sure that everybody has an equal slice of the cake. And I think that's really important. And, you know, where we are now, it's very much a balancing act, isn't it? We're sort of bridge between a buyer and a vendor. We've got to make sure that we do it right for both parties. So I think from my point of view, and my advice to all the vendors is trust us. Let us do what we do best. Let us, you know, get the cars on sale. If we don't, let's get a bid. Let's negotiate on those bids, you know, and take it from there, really.
Yeah, and we'll
Stuart has an easy job. Stewie has an easy job because there's no such thing as the provisional in the LCV world. Now I know why my boys. Now I know why my boys always want to come and sell commercial vehicles.
I wouldn't quite say that, to be honest, Andy, but yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I think from my perspective as well, and perhaps more so within the main dealer part exchange stock that we sell from an LCV perspective. We've got to remember that the market has been so strong out there. They're having to give strong money for Part X's because the retail punters, the retail customers are in tune as to what their vehicles are worth. Now, I've seen some horror stories along the way. Some vans that are owing far, far too much money, and it's actually that type of stuff that can make the job quite hard work because you're trying to generate a bid that's not going to lose the vendor money. Sometimes you might even have a reserve that's another £1,000 over the SIV. Yeah, actually, you look at the vehicle and you might see the condition report, etc., the age, how many owners, the service history, all of that type of stuff. And you might just think to yourself, that's probably £1,500 too dear from an SIV perspective as well. So it's not all plain sailing. I mean, I work closely with, a lot, but in particular at Colchester, we sell for an awful lot of our, big dealer groups. So, work very closely with those guys around the valuations and, and trying to sort of, educate their sales guys as well when they're taking in, vehicles in part exchange as well. And that's something I'm sort of going to be accelerating a little bit more sort of over this next quarter as well, because the market has moved. And yes, the market is very good. We absolutely cannot deny that, but you can very easily get burnt at the same time. So, my sort of advice is to be cautious at the same time. Not go out all guns blazing when it's coming to take a vehicle in Part X or anything like that. I do think that there, perhaps just needs to be that little bit of thought put into the process at times. And I'm certainly seeing glimmers of it come through where that thought's not being quite put in as much as it should be.
Yeah, and I think it's worth anyone that's tuned in or viewing that doesn't see your existing insight, the gavel that you both write for and contribute to, which comes out through our social media channels. Anyone that doesn't see that is a fantastic source of insight in terms of what's happening on those digital rostrums, and certainly, it proves your consultative approach. And Andy, I know your team, you head up the group auctioneers, that the relationship they have with buyer and vendor is crucial in terms of setting expectations and understanding what the market's doing. So coming on, just before we talk about, I'm going to ask you to get the crystal balls out and polish them and predict what's going to happen. I think it's worth, we're now, as you said, Andy, around about a month since forecourts could reopen, non-essential retail has opened, and obviously we're moving out of lockdown. I was lucky enough to catch up with Liam Keegan, who's MD, as you know, of Manheim Auction Services. We recorded a fuel talk celebrating Manheim's centenary year this year, which is a proud moment for both of us, and I know for you two as well, because we've invested a lot of our careers and passion in the Manheim world. And it's worth talking about what's going to happen in terms of Manheim's return to physical auction, because I know we're getting asked that question by buyers and vendors. And Liam was really keen to stress when I caught up with him, and it's worth mentioning here because of the fact we're talking about Manheim in the marketplace. You both know we've been running online simulcast sales now for all but 2 months of the last 12 months. So that first lockdown, we stopped we stopped online auctions and then restarted. We now have a position where buyers can book an appointment on pre-sale appointments, come and view vehicles, which is great. And of course, as ever, and we know this as team members of Manheim, there's no doubt Manheim Cox Automotive, of paramount importance is the health and safety of us as team members, our customers, our suppliers. And so very much that, on the basis of that, it's business as usual for us right now with online sales, with simulcast, and we'll continue to stay close to customers and their requirements. So that hasn't changed that position. But I guess what we have seen is some interesting trends develop with online sales. And Andy, it's something you touched on earlier, which I'd like to expand on, which was the fact we're seeing buyers traditionally that would maybe not have bought from a Manchester site, based in Exeter, and that surely has to be purely down to online. And that stock shortage, that perfect storm that we're seeing now, from the sound of it, are we seeing more buyers actually attending these online events than we would have traditionally seen in our old pre-pandemic physical world?
Without doubt. You look at some of our evening sales, and whether it be or some of the dealer sales, we're probably having 30-40% more people logging online than they would turn up physically.
Wow.
So that's number one. Number two is that we're having people buying cars who vowed never to buy a car online. But when you speak to them, they say, well, why would I want to go back buy physical? Why would I want to sit in the car for 2 hours there and 2 hours back? And so there has certainly been a change. We spoke, I think the last time you and I spoke, we spoke about about mental awareness and about people being lonely and about people being on their own. I think there's still very much a yearning for that people want to come and they want to see their friends and they want to meet up. We know that some of our friends and our competitors have put dip their toe into return to physical. There hasn't been, I don't think there's been the crowds of people coming back. I think people feel comfortable, and safety is absolutely paramount in what we do. And all the way through, we followed the government roadmap in what we intended to do, and quite rightly, and absolutely fully supportive of that. And I think we've got to do that. Safety has to be number one. But as far as business is concerned, we're selling record numbers of cars to record numbers of buyers. And we couldn't really ask for any more. The only thing that's different is the actual person there in front of you. And I repeat what I said before. It's the auctioneer's job to make that person sat at the end of a laptop or a computer feel as though he's there in the auction hall. And that's what it's all about. And the analogy that I repeat is, you've got two sports commentators commentating on Match of the Day, commentating on Talk Sport. Match of the Day, you can see the players, you can see the ball. The auctioneers don't have to say too much. Commentating, which is a physical auction, commentating on a Talk Sport or a BBC 5 Live or a radio show, they can't see the ball, you've got to say a lot more. And that is the big difference. And the quality radio commentators bring that game to life. And it's like when you read a report in a newspaper, whatever it is, you read it and you feel as if you're there. And that is what I've tried to put across to all our auctioneers. So for me, that really is a key point. We have to make everybody feel safe and comfortable in what we're doing.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy, as always. That's an Andy Conde analogy. So, Stewie, coming to you then, in terms of, are you seeing a similar thing in commercial vehicles? You got more attendance, similar conversion rates as a result?
Yeah, very much so, James. Yeah, I mean, I think, we only have to look at the top tables in each and every sale report that we have throughout our daily events throughout the week. And, you've got buyers the length and the breadth of the country making up the top buyers lists at each and every event. Interestingly, again, like a little bit of a stat that I was looking at, just this morning, and out of our top 15 buyers in April, 9 of them were based in Essex, interestingly, which is great. But I know for a fact that those vehicles have certainly, a proportion would have been purchased at Colchester, but probably quite a small fraction of it. So It's quite interesting, the people are, they're going where the stock is. They are absolutely buying where the stock is, and it's around the right type of vehicles as well. And Andy made that point very early on. It's not around the location of it. It's around, is it the right vehicle? Can I sell it? If so, I'm going to buy it. That is how people have changed, and they've had to change their mentalities. And I think from our perspective, we're holding daily events within our LCV sales. Sometimes we've got 2, maybe 3 sales going on. Like for instance, tomorrow, we've got Shepshed, Washington and Colchester. We've got 3 events running tomorrow. But what it does do is it gives buyers the ability to be able to log on to all 3 of those events at the same time. Fridays is another example where we have a standalone event for enterprise every other Friday, as well as our Mansfield sale. So you've got buyers that are logged in to their computers or laptops or off their smart devices, whatever it may be, and have got the ability to be able to bid on vehicles at 2 different locations at once. So I think it's very much the way of the world these days, and it's working very well. It's working great.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point. Certainly, I think you made, Andy, but I think Stu, you've alluded to, in terms of those buyers, our buyers that are basing themselves from either home or office from the yard. They are very much the time that it's given them back in the pandemic to buy digitally. They now, much like us, do you then therefore want to jump in a vehicle to go to one sale to see a third of the stock that you could, logically, if you log on to 3 sales and you get, much more opportunity to buy and make a profit, which let's not, forget, that's what we're there to do, to empower our vendors and buyers to transact, aren't we? And that's important. Okay, so mindful of time, and I'm going to put you both on the spot here. So starting with Andy, crystal ball time. Let's think about the next month or two when we reconvene here on Fuel Talk. What do you think we'll be seeing in terms of the marketplace? Any standout performances? Any certain behaviours you think that we'll see in the next couple of months?
I don't think we'll see any change in the supply of vehicles. I think nice vehicles will become more expensive. They'll become fewer and far between. I think a lot of our dealers will be forced to buy lower grade vehicles and probably have to do some work to them, because a lot of the smaller dealerships will be priced out to the market. I think the retail demand will continue to be very strong. I can't see there's going to be a big influx in part exchanges. I think that anything that a dealer takes in that is going to be really nice, they'll want to retail themselves. I think there'll be a lot of lower end, cheaper end market vehicles coming up for sale. I think we'll have to roll our sleeves up and really work hard to sell those. But from my point of view, I can't see any real significant changes as we head towards through summer months. I think the cost of you're looking at what vehicles are going to go up. I've always said, if you're going to buy a convertible, you buy one when the snow's on the ground, and if you want to buy a 4-wheel drive, you want to buy one when the sun's shining. And that will never change. But I think people will be tempted into buying a nice convertible. They'll want to go down to Cornwall and the South Coast, or hopefully up to North Wales on the holidays. So they want to come in a nice convertible. So I think those prices will continue to go through the roof. I think people want to treat themselves. I think quality cars will carry on making very, very strong money. So I think we're in for a very expensive period of time. The one thing I would say is when it comes to part exchanges, I think that the dealers have really got to go back to basics. I think the salesmen need to go, because I'm convinced that sometimes they're not going out to look at the vehicles. I think what have you been offered? Or we've been offered this. Well, we'll give you a bit more. And then all of a sudden the customer's gone away, they've driven away, and all of a sudden they're going outside, and as Stewie said, they scratch your head and thinking, oh dear, what have I done? So I think taking in part exchanges is going to be really key. Part of that deal, you cannot afford to lose money on a back end of a deal that you're going to make a few quid on the front end. So I think it's really key that a lot of these the salespeople, the dealers, back at bases, they go back to what they were really good at. But for me, I think we're in for a strong 2 or 3 months. Demand won't be there. I think we'll see a shortage of stock, and I think we'll still see the hunger from all our buyers. And just hope everybody keeps safe as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Andy. And coming to you, Stewie, then, just as a last comment, where do you see next couple of months?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar, James. I don't see there being a huge influx of stock anytime soon, if this year, to be honest. So, yeah, I mean, I think, from my perspective, it'll be interesting to see whether people choose to go on holidays of the 10 countries that we're allowed to potentially go to that are on the green list, Is that going to have an effect throughout the summer period? I don't know. I mean, I think from my perspective, I can't see that there's going to be a huge rush for people to go abroad and do all of that type of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily thinking that there's going to be a levelling or plateauing, so should I say, perhaps throughout the summer period. Obviously, it seems crazy that we're in May already. But yeah, I mean, from my perspective, how the markets continue to rise and how it has continued to develop so far this year, is it going to slow down? You would think it needs to, or it's going to have to at some point, because it's scary at how much it has accelerated so far throughout the first 4 months of the year. But it's our customers that are driving the market. With the sheer demand for vans, they wanting to buy them, and it's only going one way. So, will it continue that way? Yeah, I think it probably will do. we've not seen it slow down since we came back from the first lockdown, pretty much from June last year. It's just continued to go upwards since then. So, yeah, I mean, who knows, James? Who knows? I think if we were sat here this time last year saying what position are we going to be in? I think probably everyone would have said, well, there'll be the complete opposite to what has actually happened within the LCV world. So, yeah, I mean, it's from my perspective, I think, we're in a great shape. I think there's not going to be huge levels of stock around, so that will continue to drive performance. That's where I see the next sort of quarter. Perhaps, there might just be an air, perhaps a little bit of level of caution around the next half term, and then perhaps as we go into the summer period as well. But yeah, I mean, I think we're in great shape.
No, that's fantastic, as you say. And, I know certainly from looking at some of the insight that we're sharing across our social media platforms, there are significant pressures in the new vehicle supply market, which both of you have alluded to, which of course will have a knock-on effect to the used vehicle transaction. And so on that basis, I think if ever a reason to stay close to both you, your colleagues, and also our insight for everyone that's tuned in is never been more important. So both, thank you. It's always a pleasure talking to you both, and thank you for your time. It's incredibly valuable. And as we say, we'll get back to those digital rostrums. I know you're itching to do that. So to our audience, well, thank you for tuning in and your support as ever. If you found the content interesting and valuable, please give it a thumbs up or a like, and that helps others find it. So we'd be very grateful if you do that. And if there's anything, as ever, that you'd like us to focus on in a future episode, please drop us a message on our social media channels. Cox Automotive Europe, we're over Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. So again, thank you for tuning into Fuel Talk. And until next time, please do stay safe.